Hi, my name's Leighton Jim. I'm the director of development for the American Documentary and Animation Film Festival. We completed our the 2025 year, and we're very proud to have one of our award winners, Michael Granberry. His movie La Bête, am I pronouncing that right?
Very good. Yes.
La Bête won our best animated short, and with AmDocs, that means it is now qualified for an Oscar. And I did not get a chance to see it. I heard so much great feedback from other filmmakers and just people. I mean, I think you brought some people to tears. So, Michael, can you talk to me about your film and the influence and what influenced you to create this beautiful project?
Yeah, absolutely. Libet was a very interesting project. It was made very differently than we normally work in stop motion, as everything is very planned out, because it takes a long time. And so, you try to make it as problem free for yourself as possible. And with this project, it was January of 2020, and I was looking around for just a side project and realized I had dozens and dozens of very old stop motion puppets that had been built for projects much earlier in my career that, for various reasons, never got filmed, or that were just abandoned because there was no money, or the idea just wound up not being so great. But the characters existed, and these puppets are made out of like foam rubber and latex and various materials that disintegrate over time. They just turn to dust. And so they were rapidly just becoming garbage. And I realized I got to do something with them or throw them away. So I decided to just put them all in a movie together and see what would happen. I didn't write a script. I didn't do any kind of storyboards or planning with it. I really just wanted to just start animating with them and see what would evolve out of this thing. And one of the first problems that I found with this approach is that because these characters were made for so many different projects, the color palette was not cohesive. It was just garish and just not pleasant to look at. So I put a black and white filter on the pictures that I had taken, and it immediately reminded me of like a 1930s animation by Ladislas Starevich, who is one of the great grandparents of stop motion and whose work I just absolutely love. And I thought, well, I enjoy like sort of recreating vintage styles of animation because you can learn a lot from trying to figure out how did the past masters do what they did before they had computers and software and all the things we have now. And so I thought, well, maybe this will sort of be like a tribute to his work. And so I kind of just threw a bunch of puppets together and some very minimal set pieces, and I just kind of started going with it. And it started to just take on a life of its own. And it just evolved over a couple of months. And then COVID hit us, and suddenly we were in lockdown. And this thing that was like my night and weekend project became like my job. It's like I would get up in the morning and just start working on it. And I worked on it really hard for probably about 4 or 5 months. And then we all went back to work, and then it sort of became my night and weekend project again. And finally, after 4 years of just kind of going at and attacking this thing when I could, it was done. And so I gave it to a friend of mine who's a composer to compose some music for it. And I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what I had. I didn't know, what had been made. I just knew that it had a lot of characters in it that no one had ever seen because they had never been in anything. And I've not had great luck in the film festival circuit before. Modest, it's like a few films that would get into things here and there, but I've never had anything that kind of just like hit a nerve, and just like everybody's like, wow, we want to see this, we want to see this. And I think it really came about because of the way that I went into it, kind of without a plan, which I'd never want to do again. But it was unique, and I think something about the uniqueness of the approach kind of like created something unique on screen. And it's played at a lot of film festivals over the last year. And AmDocs was just an incredible experience to have it there, and the fact that it was recognized the way it was just blows my mind.
Well, not just us. I mean, Sundance. I saw that you had some great recognition at
Slam
Sundance too.
dance, slam
Oh,
dance.
Slam Dance. I misread my dyslexia example. But still, that's another great one to be recognized
Yeah,
for.
exactly. And you know, to be honest with you, when I first started submitting to festivals, I sort of actively avoided anything that was like Oscar qualifying because I didn't think that I was like there's absolutely no way. So I might as well just save the money and you know like go out you know to sort of like the hardcore genre festivals and things like that. But then a few people who I really respect said, you know, just submit it, you know, just, you know, see, because, you know, the people who watch, who program film festivals, you never know what they're looking for. And, you know, so I kind of redirected my thinking that way and had the good luck to get selected by a few Oscar qualifying festivals. And it makes you feel good after all those years of just not knowing or not expecting to really get any kind of good feedback to be embraced that way.
Now, I know you alluded that you don't want to go through a process like this again, but obviously, it really did benefit you. Can you talk about how this process tapped into your creativity, and that really fed to this, to making Labette so special?
Yes, I can. It was very much sort of a process driven film, and you know I've had the great luck to come up you know through animation, like going from like the lowest of the low budget projects to you know things with it are a little bit more to like really big things, you know, where you have huge crews and you know it goes on, you know, for years and years to make masterpieces and things like that. So sort of kind of every shot of Labette was sort of dictated by, you know, like first of all, trying to get as many puppets on screen as possible because, like I said, I had so many of them and I was determined to get all of them on screen in at least one shot. And so everything started with okay, get as many in there as you can. And then what can this puppet physically do? Because they were made by me about 20 years ago before I really knew how to make puppets well. So some of them have very limited range of motion. And a lot of them would break, you know, the first time you would bend them. And so, you know, a lot of them were breaking on screen, you know, and having to be repaired and, you know, just to sort of limp through the scene. And another thing was I didn't really want to spend any money on this because you know, I didn't know what its future was going to be, and so I tried to make everything out of recycled materials, anything that needed to be built. So all of the sets, all of the surroundings were, everything was recycled and repurposed, and I love to do that. I think uh, it's more environmentally friendly, of course, but also when you're working with things that you just sort of discover and seeing how they can be used, it takes on something that you wouldn't have thought of. You know, it's like, you know, when you're just sort of here's a thing, I'm going to use this, and then you know it creates a unique look and a unique sort of tactile world that you're more a discoverer of this world than you know than an inventor of this world, I guess. You know, if I went
Hmm.
into my head and I just designed everything and then I was able to recreate perfectly what I saw in my head, that would be one thing. But letting the world provide the ingredients to you and then you know stirring it up into this soup this visual goulash, you know, is going to be unique, and I like to be surprised, and so whenever I'm in a situation where I'm not quite sure what all the characters are going to do, you know, or how it's going to work, but I know it's going to look like something, so it'll be something that no one's ever seen, and I've certainly never seen it. I like sort of being on that. that receiving end of the surprise, like it's like all these ingredients flying around in the world, or in, sort of accumulating in a as a gift that I'm going to get to open. And and if once it's done, then I get to share it with everybody else. So I think not having all my questions answered, as I go into something is usually my favorite part of the creative process.
But this film, from the feedback I had, it had a lot of heart and it really touched people in a very emotional way. Uh, can you talk about the process of finding that heart and how and connecting with the audience, or maybe it's not just connecting, it's just finding something true within the story that really resonates with people. Can you talk about that part of the process, the storytelling part?
Yeah, I think, because, as I said at the outset, I didn't have a script or storyboard, so I kind of didn't know where it was going to go. But I do have, prior to working in animation, which I got into in my mid 30s, I was working in theater and film and live action and in television for, a couple of decades. And so I think over that much time, story structure kind of gets into your bones, and even though there wasn't a script, I still think in terms of like wide shot, close up, wide shot. I still sort of think of things sort of cinematically, like how would I get this across? And starting this in 2020, which was such a horrible year, and I was following the news, and just as the world was just going through these awful spasms of sickness and cruelty and isolation and stuff, it sort of became my therapy in a way too, to, I'm sure, process what I was seeing in the world, and what was going on everywhere. And just it hit a point where it just kept getting more cruel and more dark and more cruel and more dark. And I hit a point where I was like, I got to be away from this. I've got to get out of here. It's beautiful in Portland. I want to go outside and plant flowers and trees and be with life. And so I kind of walked away from from that for a little bit. And that that sense of getting back to someplace good, of course we all had that feeling, we want to get back to someplace good. I think that sort of seeped in and became really important to me, is like, okay, you can't make people just go through this grist mill of of pain, without there being some sort of hopeful note at the end. And it came about, I think, from the time that I was spending planting flowers and trees and being outside. Because I know you haven't seen the film yet. I don't know, spoil it for you, but there's just a very special moment that came about again, that was just kind of discovered, like in the process of it, where this very dark film, suddenly, color, comes back into it, and some joy, and after much trial and tribulation. And I knew when I handed it off to my friend Lito Velasco, who is the composer, and just incredibly talented guy who understands the language of cinema just so fluently. And there's no dialogue in the film, there's a minimal sound effects, but there's no actual speaking. So the story all happens visually. I knew that he would help sort of take the visuals, and he would direct the emotional story through sound. And when I heard the music that he was coming up with, it was just, I was crying. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to take it, so much further than I could ever do on my own.
Wow, I mean that's great. You know, so I'm I'm gonna say this, it may be silly. I'm a big fan of Ted Lasso, and
Uh-huh.
that was a project that really evolved during the pandemic, kind of like yours. And there's a certain part to that really makes that special. And it
Mhm.
sounds like there's you have that kind of heart with yours.
Uh,
It's just
thank
it's just
you.
when you talk about that, that's what I kind of hearing. can have you talked to other people or seen other projects that were born during the pandemic, and do you see a certain uh trend with those pieces of art?
I haven't seen like a thematic trend, but I have seen a lot of artwork that came out of isolation. In fact, I would love to see, just a block of films, that people made, during that time, because it was a place where, or it was a time when people felt like, okay, this is, you know, it was such an awful curse, but I thought I have to think of this as some kind of gift, not what's going on in the world, but this block of time, as this is some sort of weird, terrible gift, and I want to make something good come out of this. And so I think there are a lot of other people too who did that. And for a lot of people, it was a chance to take off the all of the inhibitors, all like the self censoring that we have to do when we're working on somebody else's dime.
Yes.
It's like when we're on somebody's payroll and we have to, hit, their expectations. And it certainly was for me. I was working on Wendell and Wild, which is a feature film directed by Henry Selick, who did Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline and James and the Giant Peach. And, it's a wonderful project. And because it's going to be shown on giant, movie screens, it's every little tiny speck of dust is, something that you're trying to chase and, keep it as perfect as possible. And it could be like brain surgery, all day, every day. And I needed a place to just go and make a mess, if that's what happened, or to just improvise and just act purely instinctively, and just sort of like let inspiration kind of drive the boat. And I think a lot of other people found that too. So, you'll see things just like, wow, that's not something that, you know, somebody approved, and said, yes, go forth and make this. This came purely out of your heart. And so I love when I see that. I've met a couple of younger animators, who are just kind of getting started, and they're telling me I was, COVID happened when I was, in my senior year. So my senior thesis film was filmed, during lockdown, or things like that. And, you see a lot of, I guess if there's one theme, the theme of connection is one that I've noticed a few times. Characters who feel isolated and and bonding with another character. So I've seen that, and I feel like Libet has that too. That sort of reaching out for connection, and when connection fails or is thwarted, can it get around that somehow? And the whole place if the world crumbles at the end, there's still hope, in the ashes and whatever's left.
But I mean, it's an interesting thing because, when you look at the history of art, a lot of great art was made during very dark times and, the world's history. So obviously, sometimes I wonder about where the great art's going to come next. But let's get back to this time.
Sure.
A general question, not so much about Labette, but just art in general. How important do you think art is today? Because obviously we're going through a very tumultuous time, and a lot
Hmm.
of things are being challenged, threatened, or whatever. How important do you think it is for artists today to create great art and just create these certain messages that maybe need to be out there?
I think art is more important than ever in dark times. I mean, it seems that this is like it's people, on us like on the conscious in your face level, people think I don't have time for art, I don't have time, for beauty. I've just got to, get through my day. But I think that that's actually when you need art the most, because it it speaks to things in your soul. It speaks to things in your psyche that are true, or want to believe are true, or want to hang on to. And I don't think there's any, I don't think that it's odd at all that artists are some of the first people that get, shut down or chased out when, repressive regimes are in control of or want to be in control of the plot. And I think, that's when, art is, like the weeds, coming up through the cracks, in the concrete, and just, you know, proving that life is still there, that that all sorts of opinions have value, that that the world is a much richer, wider place than our smallest emotions, our smallest impulses, our most selfish impulses. And I don't know about you, but I mean, in my own life, anytime I felt like my my motivations were being driven by a selfish point of view, my life started to get bad very quickly. It's like, or just not good. It just, I've taken that lesson to heart. I don't need the universe to hit me over the head with a brick, every time. It's like, nope, if I'm, trying to be, of service to other people, or, or to give some kindness back to people. I see the benefits of that, almost immediately. And if what I'm here on this planet to do is to help sort of push this art forward, then I'm going to just do it as long as my battery is still operating, because this is clearly what I'm going to have to give. And as I feel like the response that I get from people is like, I needed to see this, or I just, the number of emails I've gotten have been astonishing. People saying things like, this film changed my life. And I'm like, what? Really? Whoa. This is, yeah, okay. But it's like I know, just from the years of like, working in, in theater and film and TV, is like, you never know how something is going to hit somebody. You might think that it's like so, but then the person right next to you has just been hit by a comet, and they're just and so it's not my job really to decide, what this is. It's just to get it out there, and hopefully, it hits people, or some people in a good way. And I feel like the more art there is, like the more hope we collectively have. So I just never want to stop doing it. And I'll keep making art, no matter what I have.
That's so beautifully put. Thanks for sharing that. And I think I did a few interviews for the festival, and I just told people what I love about our festival is people aren't doing it for a big paycheck. People are expressing something they feel passionately about, and they've dedicated whatever they can to put this out on screen. So that's
Yeah.
what I love about our festival, because everyone's doing it
Yeah.
out of passion rather than paycheck. So
Oh,
that's what
it's
I
so
love.
obvious too. Yeah, it's so obvious.
In the background we see your Emmys,
Oh,
and we're very proud that we're putting you on your path to an EGOT. Can you talk about your Emmy Awards really quick, and share with us what you won them for?
sure. I've had the good luck to work on a lot of wonderful television. And I actually I kind of got into movies like through horror films, which I think Libet is sort of a horror film or a fantasy horror film, things like that. So I mean, that's always sort of been very, near and dear to my heart. But I had the great luck to work on a preschool series many years ago called Tumbleleaf, which was uh, my first foray into preschool television. And I actually didn't realize that there's a very fine line between preschool television and horror movies. Basically, if you flip the soundtrack, it can, work as either. But I was working with this really talented group of animators on Tumbleleaf, and I was when I got onto the show on its first season, I was the least experienced animator by at least 10 years. Like everyone was way more uh, experienced than I was. And, looking around the room of people, I just thought, this is not my peer group. I don't know why I'm here. But they were so everybody was so welcoming and so free with their knowledge. I just thought, my God, this is one of the best jobs for me personally, that I've had at this point, because one of the things that when you start with an art form, and you kind of get good really really fast, and then you sort of plateau for a while where you're good but you don't know, okay, how do I get better? What's the next step? And the next step for me is you have to work with people who are more experienced than you are on harder stuff. And so I had reached that point where I was, kind of working on one level, but I'm like, if I want to get to the next place, I gotta do something that's gonna make me cry, because it's so hard. And that it wound up being this beautiful, beautiful show. And so the show came out, the first season I think came out in 2015, and it won several Emmys. I was one of the Emmy winners that year for individual achievement in animation, which, considering the people that I was working alongside, blew my head off. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And so I had a very large case of imposter syndrome until season two, and I was blessed to win the same award again. And I thought, okay, well, now I feel like I deserve to be here. I was like, okay, the first one wasn't some mistake or something like that. And that was a beautiful validation. And then by the fourth season, which was the final season, I had been promoted to animation supervisor on that show, which is sort of working hand in hand with the director. And we collectively, myself and my supervising or my assistant animation supervisor and the director, we collectively won for outstanding directing for a preschool series in 2020. So one good thing did happen in 2020.
Well, it sounds like you're on a hot streak because one of the current things you're working on too is also Severance. Can you talk about what you do for Severance, which is and just kind of like the what it's become? It's become such a big hit.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, Severance was one of those magical, when you're having the initial phone call, this is going to be a maybe once in a career kind of exciting adventure to go on. And when I got the job, which was back in 2022, actually, the show itself had the first season was out, and it was being recommended to me by my small group of friends who I trust. This the people whose our tastes are very much alike. So it's like, okay, if they're telling me it's good, I know I'm gonna like it. And so everybody's like, you got to watch it, you got to watch it. And I was like, yes, I know, it's right there. And then I got a call about creating this stop motion sequence for the show. And I thought, oh, I have to go watch it right now because I'm going to be talking to Ben Stiller tomorrow on Zoom. So I went and I immediately binged it, and I was immediately hooked on it. And I started watching it again immediately. And I was just, my head was exploding again. And I had so many questions. And I got to have a Zoom meeting with Ben Stiller the next day, just ask him, all these questions about, why this medium in this show and within the context of the show. And he had some just amazing ideas and was so gracious. He was just, said, I don't work. I love stop motion. It's not my medium. But my family and we watch The Year Without a Santa Claus every year, which is a great Rankin Bass classic. And I was like, I love that one. I know it, practically backwards and forwards. And so he really let me again sort of dip into my love of vintage animation and recreating vintage styles because he wanted it to look very vintage. And he let me pitch just lots and lots of ideas. And, when I gave him reference from, films from the 60s and 70s to look at, and he probably said yes to, I mean, close to 90% of the things that I was throwing out there, wound up being in the piece. And, and then, things, just wild things when you work on a project like that. Like he said, well, for the voice of this character, we've asked Barack Obama. And I was like, what? And, just, I'm not used to having conversations like this. And he said, well, Barack Obama politely declined. So we're asking Keanu Reeves. And I was like, what? So, I'm like, okay, this is, this, what we're doing feels familiar, but the scale of what it's going to be in is completely a next level, for the projects that I've, gotten to work on. And I've been blessed to work on some pretty big things. But it was really exciting. We worked on the storyboards, we worked on the previs, then we got in, we actually built and shot everything in Burbank, California, at Starburns Industries, over about 9 weeks, and then we had some post production, and then we had to keep it a secret for 2 years. That was the hardest part. I tell my friends I had to act like I was severed because I couldn't tell anybody where I'd been, what I'd been working on. I was like, I have no clue. When it finally came out, obviously we were thrilled, and then you start to like meet people. I hadn't really talked about the show with a whole lot of people, but once it came out and we were able to talk about it, people approached me and like, I love this show, we can talk about, so like now I have all these, Severance buddies that we can, just talk about, oh my gosh, did you see, could you believe what happened? And so we all have our own theories, and they're all like plying me for like clues or what's going on. It's like, I promise you, we know nothing. we only know what we did, and what we did was basically a recap of season one. So can't help you out.
Well, Michael, we're running out of time. I really
Oh, sorry.
enjoyed speaking with you about your film, about your career, and we're waiting for you to get that second leg of your EGOT. So we're all in your corner rooting for you. And
Thank you so much.
thank you for all your time. Just a quick reminder: the American Documentary and Animation Film Festival. Our next festival in 2026 is March 25th to 29th. If you're a filmmaker, you can submit your films now. Just go to Film Freeway, or you can go to our website, www.amdocfilmfest.com, and submit your films. You have till the end of the year. Michael, thank you so much, and good luck with the Oscars. We're rooting for you.
Thank you so much, Leighton. I appreciate it.